Hi, I'm Allison Forche. I'm a relationship manager with Gerber LLC, and we are a professional services firm which helps first generation entrepreneurs grow with purpose by providing guidance to integrate and achieve their life, business, and financial goals. As a part of integrating life and business goals, many of our clients have the goal of funding their children's college education. Aaron Greene has helped many families, including clients of ours, achieve this goal. Aaron's passion for empowering students and families to find their best path through education was born from navigating his own. He entered college determined to cover the cost himself, and by thinking outside the box and looking at college in a way no one else did, Aaron was able to graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering and $40,000 surplus. Through a highly personalized career planning and funding strategies, Aaron now devotes his time to helping families plan for college, all while saving them money and the height of our country's student loan crisis. We are delighted to have Aaron share his expertise with us this morning.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, thank you for the intro. Well, everybody, welcome. Good morning. Good early morning to us, to everybody. It's funny to hear you say the student loan crisis. I mean, like, my goodness, how many crises can we compound on each other at one given time? like, so, but yeah, this has been really my work for the last 10 years, which is working with families on getting ready to go off to college, academically, financially, and understanding and breaking apart this thing that we call internally this economy of education and how it's constructed. Because honestly, no one's broken it apart before. No one's really taken a good look at what is it, how is it being divvied, how are we actually evaluating education in educational models. The concept of education for so long, and I still believe this is true, it's invaluable. Like, you cannot really measure an education on that fundamental level. It's important for all of us to be educated. But once we get to college, and I'm thinking of that in terms of the K through 12 setup, and especially getting us to general knowledge. Once we get to college, though, the concept of what we think of as education shifts, because actually, and follow me on this, it becomes more of a commodity at that point. And the reason why I say that is because the values change. Because for what every student is looking for, what every student's getting ready to go off to college for, it changes into something completely different. Meaning, if you're going to be a teacher, your starting salary is going to look like this, engineers are going to look like this, market, this and the other. The actual value number shifts based off of career path. So our position has been, if that's the case, if we actually see a measurable outcome for what that degree is going to yield, then why are we not actually measuring what the cost is going to be in the same way? Basically, you can't pay the same cost for a teaching degree that's going to, as the same thing as an engineering degree, when the yield is going to be twice as good. So how do you unravel that? How do you really go back into it? How do you really make adjustments for it? How do you understand it? It's really the wild, wild west of financing, actually. Like, it's quite interesting to see this thing that we actually spend the same amount as a house on, and one, in the vast majority of cases still in this country, we don't consult professionals to do it. And two, we're signing kids up for student loan debt that's literally equivalent of a house by the age of 17, 18, 19, and it takes them nothing more than like a swipe in a box or just a quick sign on the dotted line in order to do it. My wife and I refinanced our house a little over a year ago. It took 3 witnesses, 45 minutes, and about 100 pages to do it. And it takes a kid roughly about 5 minutes to sign off on the same amount of debt to get into college. That shows you the state of this and why it actually is that we're a crisis, because there is a disconnection in what's actually being done and the amount of money that's being allocated to it, and what the measures that we should be taking in order to make sure it's done right. I mean, again, we're seeing this down from not just even the student loan debt side, but we're seeing a lot of families sacrificing retirement to do this as well. We're seeing families paying with let's say 2.5 kids, roughly $200,000 per kid. You do that, and now your retirement's gone. And that's literally how the slope on this can really just go right down beneath you. So in order to kind of kick this off, I'm going to do a little bit of a mixture between PowerPoint presentation, a little bit of a video, and actually whiteboarding and stuff like that to just kind of try to keep it fun and keep it moving. So actually, I'll start off in PowerPoint. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Can you see that okay? All right, perfect. So yeah, what we're going to talk about is the state of college in 2020 and really going forward and beyond and how this really works. But we adapted this quick video, and it's about 3 minutes, but I think it's worth it because I think it just kind of explains the whole concept behind this and what we think about this as far as college is concerned. And this was produced in-house from us.
College has changed a lot over the past 20 years. So how we think about college needs to change as well. Choosing a college is one of the largest consumer decisions a person will ever make in their lifetime. And not only are you buying your child an education for the same cost as a house these days, you are also buying your child's largest predictor of future income over a lifetime. Students used to be able to work themselves through school on a part-time job. Now, even families that have saved for college since their child's birth are still having to take out loans. To make matters worse, Americans are buying college based off where a friend is going, what the weather's like in a certain state, and the reputation of a school based off a ranking in a magazine. And today, with the ability to apply to schools online, students are applying to way too many schools. Why is this a problem? Because now, schools have to sift through a record number of applications, making it harder for everyone to get into the right school. For example, The Ohio State University receives over 52,000 applications. They accept about half of them. However, less than a third of those accepted actually enroll. So, like an airline, schools often overbook, knowing a certain percentage of students won't show up. This is why schools create deferred lists, because if not enough accepted kids enroll, they can still fill their freshman quota. So you can see where college today has kind of become too unpredictable and too costly. Here at College Liftoff, we look at college differently, in a way that makes sense. Instead of looking at schools and assigning them value based off of some arbitrary evidence, we look at individual degrees and assign them value based off of how their graduates are doing in the job market and how much it costs to attain that degree. This way, we can judge which degrees are good investments at a school and which ones will lead to years of debt or low job market prospects.
When you decided to buy a house or open an investment portfolio for retirement, you decided to consult a professional. So why wouldn't you consult a professional about college, the largest investment you're actually going to make in your life? This is why we're here at College Liftoff, to allow our families to make logical, informed decisions about college throughout the entire process. We start with career planning so we know exactly what our students are going to do after graduation. This way we can help you choose the best major to achieve that goal. This allows us to identify the schools that do that major best. Finally, we'll make sure the school fit is the best for the student's personality, background, and situation. We're here to secure your son or daughter's brightest future and save you thousands of dollars along the way. Let us do the same for you.
So I like that in one way because it sums up the problem really at the beginning. And it's really just about understanding that this is a value-based decision. This is an asset buy. This is no different than any other large asset buy. This is no different than buying a home. This is no different than buying retirement. It's, again, of the same cost magnitude as both of those things. Two, there is literally a plethora of choice. There's 4,200 universities in this country, each one with an average of 200 majors. It's actually a Google-esque problem of choice. And I always say, like in that same vein, when you go to a realtor, and the reason why you do it when you go to buy a home is that there's roughly in the Columbus area, 1,100 houses on the market any given day. You're never going to sift through that many options on your own. You go to a realtor to give you 10. So that way you can narrow down your focus for what you're looking for. They find those right 10. You visit 5 to 7, you bid on 2 to 3, you end up with 1. Same in concept here. We want to take that 4,200 down to about 15 to 20. Have the kids study them. Have it boiled down to apply to about 5 to 7. You visit somewhere between 4 and 7, 4 and 8. We end up bidding on 2 to 3 and going back and forth with them. End up with 1. Same in concept. So who we are and why we're even here in the first place. This is our 10th year in operation here in the Columbus area. Actually, we're getting ready to go on 11 years here in September. We graduated last year about 80 seniors coming out of school in 2019. We're still doing our tally this year because the school year has gotten a little bit more extended than usually. Usually is wrapped up in May. This year will be wrapped up here in the middle of June. But we'll have about 100 kids this year. And so far, we've launched a little over 1,000 families in this area into the best situation. And we measure things in a couple different ways. Student confidence, how good does the kid feel about their school choice? How good do they feel about their major? That's really a time question, which is really a money question, honestly. Because if you're in school longer than 4 years, the equation's thrown off. So we have to make sure that it's right there. And we've saved families up to last year roughly about $46 million in higher education expenses. We're looking at it this year. We're going to be able to add probably about $20 million more for this class year that we've saved. So we'll be closer to $66 to $70 million saved in higher education expenses. So how do we get here? Let's just talk about the problem. So how do we get to this point? Well, what happens when this is done wrong? The burdens of poor college planning. Well, 30% of incoming freshmen drop out, 50% of them never going to graduate. That's a number that hasn't changed a whole lot as time goes on. The problem now is student loan debt. Those kids are taking on debt at a monumental level compared to where they were in years past. The national average to get a bachelor's degree today is about 6.2 years, which is, of course, 2 years longer than it should be. Why that's even more of a problem as well is actually because of scholarship money, not as much because of the debt, which is still a problem too. But scholarship money is the real issue for being in school too long. So the vast majority of students in this country get scholarship money in some form or another. It's usually a range of about 10 to 70% off the sticker price. Like all of our kids do, we bake it in that way for them as a student, as a family. But scholarships run for how many years on average? Anybody have a good idea? 4. You said it, Allison. 4 years. So we're seeing that last year to 2 years costing families more than the previous 4 years combined. Because they're overspending by $20,000 to $50,000 a year. You multiply that by 2 years, now you've overspent by $100,000, which is insane. It's crazy. So that's an important piece. And that's something we always have to really work on. And a lot of that is mostly just because students are shifting their major so often. And the major starts early, a lot earlier than it did in years past. You get into your classes really into your freshman year. National student loan debt right now is actually a little closer to $1.7 trillion, which is still second to mortgage debt in this country. Nothing else is close. The class of 2018 graduated with an average debt of about 34.5. 19 was somewhere around 35. All this leads to the inability to gain independence, which really leads to the last piece, which is sapping parents' retirements. And that's what we don't want. You cannot borrow for retirement. So you really don't want to be pulling out retirement for education. In fact, you shouldn't, don't do it. It's really the answer to that. So I love this chart because it really shows that it doesn't just feel like college has gotten more expensive. It absolutely has. So when we chart the rising inflation of college versus stuff, everyday stuff, food, home price, consumer price index, all those are right in this, let's say, 200 to 400 range as far as increase over time over the past 35 years. Healthcare, we talk about healthcare all the time in this country. It's gone up roughly 600% in that time frame. College has doubled it. College has gone up almost 1,200% in that same time frame. It doesn't feel like it's gotten more expensive. It absolutely has. And we see some interesting situations here in this chart where you can see some interesting real slide ups, and it happens in this mid to early 2000 time frame. Anybody have a good guess about what's hitting at this particular time? Economic recession. This is when we start seeing the downturn in the market. So what happened this go around in the 2008 economic recession is something a little different than happened in previous recessions in this country, is that people flocked to education this time to think it as the stall for their job crisis problem. So what that did was just create this boom for not just regular schools, but online schools. This is where you saw the real takeoff of the Phoenix Onlines and things like that. But what it did was really just flood the market with bachelor's degrees. And the value of that still isn't there. So I always get the question of, what do you think about online schools? And the answer to that is, well, what does your employer think about it? because that's really the question that you want to ask. Education itself is only as valuable as the person that's getting it deems it to be worth, and then the person sitting across from them deems it to be worth. That's where you find the inherent value in education, because there is no tangible asset to hold. So my answer to the online degrees, I don't see enough employers that really value it yet, mostly because they're not from that background yet. It's kind of the same case of like we have Honda in Marysville here in Central Ohio. They recruit out of Ohio State and Purdue. Why? That's where the engineers are started from. So you see that they have more of a fit and feel for what's really happening in those markets. Plus, they're putting a lot of research dollars there. So that's the difference there. But yeah, that's where we see this huge boom, is right in this economic depression type of stage. And college costs went through the roof. Why in the world did that happen? Well, mostly because they're unchecked. No one's really bothered to ask a university, why in the world are you raising costs to this much? Much like healthcare, college education is a life-giving thing in this country. And so we kind of keep those things, we know how important they are. And truthfully, they're priced through the roof, and we don't really question them as often as we should in some cases. So how do we do this better? When college is done right, well, when planning is done right, I should say, even better, students have defined career goals. That's actually a main part, and we'll talk a lot about that because that is the beginning of the domino effect of how you actually approach this thing. Students feel confident about their school choice. I can't say that enough, because if you're not comfortable, you're not going to be successful, so you want to make sure you go through that. Families are not overpaying for tuition. We have a staunch formula for that, and the next one, which is student has properly controlled student loan debt. We'll talk about the formula and how to get to those. But we live in a day and age where it's darn near impossible not to take on student loan debt, but you can absolutely control it. And that's the difference maker there. And the last bullet point there, students will graduate with the best preparation to get a job, to get a job in the market. There are a lot of intangibles we get out of college, of course. We've all gotten them. But the main reason we're there is for training for the next level, to be able to get out and get a job in whatever field you're going for. So we never want to overlook that main point. So that takes me to the next piece of like, how do we actually do this well? How do we actually get the best, what we call return on value for education, how this is constructed? This is where I'm actually going to switch to the whiteboard for this. Let's see here. Here we go. All right, excellent. So when we like to think of this, and I'm going to draw this out. I usually go through a PowerPoint, but it's a lot more fun when I can do it on a whiteboard. So I like to think of this as, how do we get this best ROI for education? Where, of course, return on value we measure in all forms, but especially in money, where the easy example I always use for our kids is, let's say if I bought Apple stock today for $100 and I sold it next week for $150, my return on that investment is, of course, $50. Where the vehicle of investment, the thing that's actively doing the work in that scenario, is the Apple stock itself. That's what's doing the work. In the case of our education, it's college. It's the actual university choice that's doing work. So the question becomes, what are the metrics we could put around it in order to understand the value of the investment when this is a problem we have with education? Again, there's nothing tangible about it. So it's not like if you invested in a building where you can hypothetically taste and touch and feel it in that sense. The education your student is getting is only worth as much as they deem it to be worth. And again, the person sitting across from them, getting ready to hire them, deems it to be worth. So the question becomes, how can we measure that? How do you really measure something intangible? There's 4 ways to do this. The first piece of this is the career side. And this is really about identifying direction. It's saying you're going off to college for a reason. So many students go off to college for no particular reason, and that's where we end up with a national average of 6.2 years. So that's such an important piece. Honestly, I could spend hours just talking about how you do this with a teenager. I will leave this with you in that. And mind you, this is the majority of what we do every day. This is 65 to 70% of our process is really working through that. We spend 40 hours a piece with every one of our kids individually, just working through the career development pieces, because it is the start of the whole thing. But it's actually easier to do with them than it is with us as adults. For a really easy reason, actually. And the reason is we're all jaded in a good way. Our biases are based off personal experiences within particular fields. They're total blank slates at this point. So when you can give them exposure to career fields that actually surround their interests, you get natural versions of like and dislike from them. So you can see really where they're coming from. You do that enough and you get enough exposure in there, you can actually make some seriously good headway. We see it happen every single day. This is the main piece, the starting piece for us, always. But this is also just as much of a metric for the universities themselves. That's our way of holding their feet to the fire and saying, okay, university or universities, how really well are you doing at placing students in the next level in this particular program? Because that's the payoff, right? They're asking us to buy this education basically at the rate of a brand new car every year. I don't think it's an unfair question to ask. Show me results. So we're really not interested in graduation rates particularly here. We're more interested in job placement rates, average starting salaries, how those compare against the market. Basically, of other schools is likeness and kind, really how well are you doing? Because that tells me a whole lot about how strong the school really is academically, where every school is different. Every school will focus on something completely different. OSU is an easy model for this. Ohio State today has right around 177 different majors. Reality is they're good about 50 of them. I can find better schools and better things about 127. And I'm a Buckeye grad, and so I'll say that's the case. But I do know within those 50, they are doing one heck of a job of internship rates are up, job placement rates are up, average starting salaries are strong. A really interesting indicator, we see a lot of research projects being bounced back and forth between industry and academia. Long story short, companies are handing down work to those departments and saying, work on our stuff. That deems reputability. That shows me that this education is worth it. Not just the school telling me so, or even using as a workforce for that matter. I want to hear from the horse's mouth. I actually want to hear from industry. So with that in concept, you can start adding in a piece of this, which, well, you can start adding in value essentially. And we'll add in value and also start to flip the script on how to think about college, not in terms of the school and the name, but actually in terms of program and program strength to the name. So this is a way of summarizing all that in one example. Take a degree set like supply chain management, which of course is a more techie business degree, one of 30 different degrees you can get at business school today, built for more of an Amazon-based economy in the end. Anyway, if you look at the top 5 schools in the country right now today that are best at supply chain management, you'll find number 5 is MIT. As one would expect though. Here's the problem for MIT. MIT has a 7% acceptance rate and they're astronomically expensive. They're pushing $81,000 a year this year. I'm gonna give you a second to think about it, but think about where you think the best program is in this country. Where's the best school at this? And I'll tell you the answer. It's Michigan State. Michigan State is the best program in supply chain management in the country. They're better at everything, every measurable. They're better, their starting salaries are better, their job placement rates are better, their starting positions are better than MIT and everybody else. Here's the difference. Michigan State has a 72% acceptance rate, not 7. A 50% acceptance rate into the program. Their out-of-state costs right now are roughly $49,000 a year, room and board included. But we've seen our average kid that's come through our program get roughly $15,000 to $20,000 in scholarship money from them as an out-of-state student. So I know I can get a 3.6 to 3.9 kid into the best program in the country for roughly 30 grand a year. And that to me is value. That's how we can really concrete this and make this thing work. So the real next question after that though, is where did that scholarship money come from and how do we keep getting more of it? So that's really understanding, excuse me, that's understanding the financials of this and how this system actually works. Because here's the thing about the cost of college. It's not actually determined by the sticker price. It's actually determined by the financial aid histories of the universities. So I'm going to give you a very loose example for how to think about this. So let's take something like, and this is a great example, a Harvard versus an Ohio State versus Otterbein. And if I looked at tuition for each one, where Harvard's base tuition right now is $49,000 a year, OSU is 11, and Otterbein is 32. So let's play a hypothetical. Let's say your student gets in all 3 options. Of course, the question I always ask, which school do you feel is the most affordable year to year for your kid to go to school to? And of course, the average answer that we should think is OSU. The correct answer, though, for the average family in this country That one. Harvard's cheapest option on the board. And the reason for it, money. Money in the bank particularly. Think of colleges like individuals. They're like people. Every individual has a different amount of wealth accumulation. Colleges are no different. In the case of universities, we call their versions of bank accounts endowment funds. Harvard today is sitting on an endowment fund worth $39.2 billion, which means they could fund every kid that walked in the door for the next 70 years while taking the cent. Versus Ohio State, which today is sitting right around $5.2 billion, which isn't terrible. That's actually more or less top 5% of all public schools. That's not even close to this. It's not even in the ballpark. And let's pull the curtain back. Let's see what's really happening with these systems. Harvard has 3 times less students than Ohio State does. Harvard has 22,160 kids. Ohio State has 65,000 as part of the school system. Even further than that, only 50% of these kids are even applying for aid. So that's really 11,000 students that have access to a $39 billion endowment fund. Versus here's 80% of these kids are applying for aid. So that's something like about 48,000 students that have access to $5.2 billion. But the sticker price is a fifth of this, so there's less room to cover. So we just went into these interesting financial patterns. The last thing we look at in order to judge cost is this number. Average student loan debt. How much debt is each kid walking out with after 4 years respectively at that school? The average debt walking to Harvard today is $15,000. That's it, which is obviously insanely low. And that's only for the kids that take on debt, which is even crazier. The average debt coming out of OSU at the same time was $28,200, which sadly isn't terrible. The national average right now being almost 35.5. So here we have it. The school is a fifth of the cost, but almost twice as expensive in the end, all because of money and how it flows through their system. And then there's another number that's just as significant as these, and the truth is, it's the most significant number for you as a family because it is for every family we work with. It's a number called non-need-based gift aid. That's how much money is a school giving when need is not a consideration, a part of the formula. So the families we work with, the families we affect the most, are all middle income to slightly above. Need isn't a part of the formula based there, meaning the government's not going to stand in and give you anything as far as aid is concerned. So the question becomes, how much is school giving when that's the case? And the great thing is, every school reports it. Every one of them do. So you can actually get really fine on being able to predict exactly how much money to expect out of the school. We can a year in advance. So when I look at, as the easy example, Harvard, I can see their middle of the road kid, their 50th percentile kid, is getting a financial aid package worth $47,000 to $49,000 a year, with $43,000 to $47,000 of that in the form of gift aid, aka non-need-based gift aid, also known as scholarship money. So let's say the average kid is getting $45,000 a year for free from Harvard, which is absolutely true. 49 minus 45, of course, is $4,000. That's it. That's how much Harvard actually costs on average, about $4,000 a year. You tack on room, board, and books. No wonder their average debt's so low. They're literally overfunding every kid and then some, and we can read it straight from the financial aid histories. Versus a good school like Otterbein. And Otterbein is a good school. The problem for them is they're a small private school with honestly just not a lot of resources. They're sitting on an endowment fund today worth about $93 million, which are pennies to $100 bills in this game. So they can't afford nearly the same amount of kid. So their average packages are worth about $15,000 to $17,000, with 8 to 10 of that in the form of gift aid. Make it easy, call it 10. 32 minus 10, of course, is $22,000. That's being passed in the form of cost or debt to the family and student. You still have to tackle room, board, and books. Long story short, it drove their average debt numbers up to $48,000 after 4 years, which is insane. There's no bachelor's degree in this country that's worth that much debt or cost. So that's how we can actually determine the cost structure. A little bit to do with tuition, more so the financial aid histories and how they play out. And the nice thing is that this isn't just Harvard versus the world. This is really just an example of a high net worth institution versus middle of the road versus low net worth. and how we use it as a buying tool, just like you would for anything, honestly. In fact, that's the beauty of having 4,200 options. There's more than enough choice to be able to sift through out there. It's just about finding the right ones. There are other schools here in this city alone that look just like Otterbein on paper, vastly different financial outcomes. Taking a look at Capital and Denison actually are great examples of that, where all three of them, including Otterbein, are roughly the same size, same field, they're all Division III. Capital has 3 times more cash on hand than Otterbein does. Capital has $300 million in the bank. Their average packages are worth $24,000 to $27,000, with $18,000 to $24,000 of that in the form of gift aid. Their average debt coming out is $18,900. Capital's right here financially. We've sent something close to 30 kids there the past 6 years. Not a single one of them has paid more than Ohio State sticker price, even though they're listed at $50,000 a year. Denison has $800 million in the bank for the same student population. They declared themselves need blind years ago, which means they don't care how much money you have. If they want you to be there, they'll make it work. That's the thing. We can rank any program, any field academically here. We can also do it financially, and then come out in vastly different arrays. So this is the first part. This is just understanding, interpreting data. This is something we all sit around and do all day long. Where this changes for each of your kids individually, where this actually starts becoming the investment, I should say, especially when we're working with them, is the cost they take on for this degree should not overcome or outweigh the career field they choose. Long story short, don't overpay for the degree. In fact, do more than that. Pay fair market value for what the degree is worth. So as in concept for how we buy education today, let's say I get up and I go to Starbucks. I typically get a tall, skinny vanilla latte, personally, which in the end is about $4.10. Well, the cost of that coffee doesn't change based off of how much money I have in the bank or how much I made the day before. Fair market value says it's worth $4.10. Then why in the world do we buy education that way? Because right now the cost of education is being based off of how much money you guys as a family have in the bank according to the Fed through the FAFSA, and then how much the university says the sticker price of the school is. But we already know this about degrees at universities. Not all degrees are created financially equal. Reality is they're just not. Because you could go to school for something like accounting, which today will yield, just as an example, $50,000 a year, versus going to school for something like Greek mythology and classic studies. What do you do with it? And the answer is nobody knows. It's pretty rhetorical. More schooling is the real answer for this. But let's say you walk out with a bachelor's degree in it, average starting salary is $25,000 a year. Let's say the cost of the school is $30,000 annually. Is that the same cost value to both of these two kids? No. Because if you take on the same amount of cost and debt at this level that this kid can afford, at this level that this kid can afford, you're in a world of hurt financially for years to come. That's where we institute our rule of thumb for cost and debt, which is, as a student, they should be taking on no more than half of their anticipated annual salary in debt based off of the future career path that they choose. The parent contribution should honestly be no more than twice that number. What that means in a long-winded way is that we can measure degree sets. So I can take two fields. In fact, we'll use accounting, and I'll put it up against something as simple as like early education. And if I looked at real-world salary trends, yes, accountants do walk out making an average of $50,000 a year. Teachers K through 5 with no frills, meaning no intervention or specialty of any sort, walk out making an average of $30,000 a year. So here we have it. You know, the same school, you could take some amount of time in school, you could pay the same cost for both of these two degrees. The question is, should you? And the answer is no. So why you should take on the same amount of cost and debt for both of these? That's going to make twice as much together. Now, the catch to this is this, though. You never want to chase money. Meaning do something as a student you know you're going to love. Because if you don't, you won't be doing it for very long. But always, always understand the financial realities of what you're walking into. So if you're walking to school making $50K, you in terms of student loan debt can afford $25,000 in total debt for that degree. You walk into school making 30, you can afford 15. That's financially doable. That's financially responsible. That's a proper investment for a kid. That's how you can get out, live, function, work all on your own. The family out of pocket, which is, well, let me rephrase this. There's a number we use for parents, and it's called family out of pocket, FOP. really states that the family should be paying no more than twice that number, student loan debt, or better put, equal to their starting salary. About $50K in total for this one. And really no more than about $30K in total for this one. About 12 and a half a year, about $7,500 a year. Because that's the value of it. That's the active value of the degree. Take that in combination with the student loan debt. That's how much you should be putting forth for it. The rest of the money should be coming in the form of scholarship money from the school, which is why this stuff is so important. Does that give a quick head shake? Does that make sense to everybody? Just want to make sure. Okay. Cool, because where we run into hiccups in this market, in our market, our universities, is we have a good school like Otterbein, but their average debt is this, $50,000 after 4 years. Their number one export, meaning their number one graduating degree for the last 3 years, has been that one. That starting salary with that debt is their average student profile. To give you an idea of what this translates into for a student, that's about $650 a month for 10 years, which is an apartment, which is also a really nice Tesla, being thrown out the door every month. On a $30,000 salary, this equation means that kid is moving back home. And that's why we're seeing so much of that happening nowadays, because people are just taking on costs and debt rampantly without thinking about it. That's why we've got to go back to this from the start and really fully identify and understand, what is it this kid truly wants to do? Let's take the time to define this well. This takes months to do properly. Find the schools that academically do that best by job placement, career placement. Match the cost structure up with it so we're buying it for the right value. And the last piece of this is fit. And that is comfortability with the campus. Because if you're not comfortable, you're not going to be successful. So going through those metrics of big versus small, urban versus rural versus suburban, even distance. I try not to think of distance in terms of state to state. Try to think of more in terms of time away from home. How long does it take me to get back? So I don't want to be an hour to 2 hours away, or 3 or 4 hours away, or 5 hours plus. Honestly, that's more of a logistics question for you guys as a family. Because is it a long car ride? Is it every couple weeks, couple months? Are there plane tickets involved? Logistically, how's this going to work out in the end? As we tend to see, a lot of students and families, honestly, will make their whole college decision right there. They'll say, my friends are going here, I like the mascot, or whatever the case may be. That is a terrible reason to make a $20,000 to $50,000 a year decision. But it is part of it. In fact, it's 1/4 of this whole decision analysis. All 4 of those have to be met in order to make a proper school choice. Honestly, you guys as a family just decide which one's the most important and you just let us know. Really. I always say these are important because they're directional, but really it's up to the family to decide which ones are more important. Even in some cases, there's a sport involved. The sport typically fits right here. About 30% of our kids have a sport they're taking to the next level. It's usually somewhere between the money, because there's sometimes some money involved, especially in Division 2 or 3, and the fit of the actual program and making sure those pieces are together. But all of them have to be met in order to make a proper school choice. So with that, I'll jump back into the PowerPoint here. And actually, give me a quick second. Alrighty, here we go. Share screen. There we go. I usually have this written out too in the PowerPoint, but it's a lot more fun when I can actually just diagram it out on a whiteboard. So planning timeline, I'd like to talk about this, and then we'll start wrapping up, and I can wrap up for some questions here very soon. For us, we're very process driven here, and this is the timeline that we exist on and that we like to operate off of. We like to start with our kids as early as mid-sophomore year. Time is the real commodity in this whole thing. That's the thing we're always working against. So the more time we have, the better. We start with students, Chucks, we're getting most of our kids in right here at this middle of this junior year right now. We'll take kids, especially going into this area, even through autumn. It just means that we have to condense everything down because you can't skip steps. It's a little bit like drinking through a fire hose at that point, but it's better done than not done at all. That's putting it mildly. But it really starts at the beginning with understanding and getting and wrapped up with this career exploration and program research. Again, that is the vast majority of what we do here. This career and career development phase, as we call it, really exists between the autumn through winter of the junior year and even before. So that way we can get a good foothold on it. It takes a good 6 to 9 months to really work through that. But while you're doing that, interestingly enough, while we're going through the students' majors of interest and really surrounding that with fields they hadn't thought about before and giving them exposure to it, we're actually knocking out two birds with one stone. We're actually lowering down and vetting through majors and interests, but we're actually using the universities as the method of doing so. So we're actually vetting school lists simultaneously. So by the end of this, they actually pop out with the right set of majors that they're interested in and the right set of schools. So actually we can lower both lists at once, which is really great. Because once we hit the spring timeframe where we are now and going into summer, this is actually the start of application season. We actually start essay writing with our kids really around spring break. The essay writing camps also started up again today. So that way we can get all that done. We get the Common Up essays in January of that year. So we have them 6 months in advance. And essay writing is vastly more important than people think it is or give it credit for. Use this in measure. You spend 3 years as a student doing your grades. That's what you report. You report freshman through junior year when you actually send everything to college. So you spend 3 years working on your grades. You typically spend 2 years working on the tests between junior and senior year. You spend 3 years building your resume. Then you can write an essay in an hour and submit it with all of it, and it's 20% of the process. That shows you the magnitude of how important writing is. And actually, we're seeing that it's even becoming even more important. As the diminishing value of the ACT or ACT continues to go down, that has to be filled with something. Grades are already at a max. They're going to be using writing, the way of telling your story, as more of an intro into who you are. That is really why essay writing is even taking a different leap even today. So we've approached it that way. We have a fully devoted writing center. We actually have a writing center team where they're comprised of people that actually did writing center work for undergraduates. We hired them out of universities where they were working with undergrads on writing. Why that's significant at all is because high schools will typically go through and try to work with their kids on the essay writing piece. God love them for trying for that, for sure. The problem is for high school, it's a different style of writing. High school writing is about volume. They just want you to write a lot. Collegiate writing is about precision and word control. This is why the essays aren't very long. They're only like 200 to 600 words. You have to relay a lot of information in a short order. That's a collegiate style of writing. So we have to institute a collegiate style of writing for them. So we actually put them through that writing camp to teach them that. That way their essay is popped out, their main essay is popped out with that already done. And we correct all their supplementals going forward throughout the entire process too. So we start and kickstart with there. That way a big chunk of this process is done and it's over. By June, we can start applications midsummer. Early is the name of this game. Early admissions and early to money. Think of both as pools. They shrink as time goes on. So we want to be as early as possible to them. So we want to make sure that this is wrapped up and done as early as humanly possible. Our drop dead deadline for all applications is October 14th. Oops, go ahead. Sorry about that, I jumped ahead. Is October 14th. That way we hit all of the early action deadlines across the board. The earliest one we know of right now is Georgia Tech, and it's October 15th. That way we're way ahead of the curve on that. Once you wrap up application season and get everything done there, and mind you too, that is extremely important to know, especially if you have a fall sport kid. Everything has to be done and should be done before they start their senior year. And I mean fall sport kid, including marching band. That's a fall sport. So we want to make sure that everything is knocked out and done. The problem is the bottleneck of this is that you never want to do 3 things at once. You can do 2 things at once, but not 3. That's when it becomes a problem. What I mean by that is you can do the sport. In most cases, sports for fall start on August 1 and application season at the same time. It's when you add the school piece that becomes a real problem. So I'd much rather them do sport and application season through August. And once they head back to school, it's school and it's sport, not school, sport, application. So I want to make sure everything's wrapped up and done before that. If we have a couple of schools that we still need to visit, that's easy enough to do. We can trickle that in throughout the year. But the actual bread and butter of getting application season done should be wrapped up before things get hot and heavy, especially, again, this year, above all years. Once we get into the November timeframe, that's when we're starting in the funding and financial aid phase. It's when we're wrapping up the FAFSA, the CSS profile if you need it. That's also when wrapping up any extra scholarship applications or anything extra that the universities may require in those regards. In most cases, you don't have to fill out extra applications for scholarships. In some cases, you do. It just depends on, it's a case-by-case basis. This is literally why we work one-on-one with every family and why you're working with an advisor one-on-one, because all these things are done on an individualized level. They need to be done that way, otherwise they won't get done, to be honest with you. Getting all that done, you apply at the end of 5 to 7 schools. and you'll start hearing back from them right around Christmas. And you'll make no mistake, especially working with us, you'll get into 5 to 6 of them because we're programming it in that way. In the end, that school list, which is what this all crescendos to, by the way, especially everything in this junior year time frame, all crescendos into the proper school list. That is the most important aspect of this. In the end, you have to have a list that's diversified. And what I mean by that is you want 2 to 3 national programs that are best of breed, known around the country being amazing in their number one topic, whatever they choose, whatever that may be. Then you want 2 to 3 regional programs that know their area as being really strong in that space. I always say the national programs you can take from here to Seattle and all about it. The regionals are known in their area, but they both should be placing students into jobs at pretty close to the same rate and pretty close to the same starting salaries. Then you want 1, maybe 2 dreamer reach schools, which is like I always want to apply to Duke or UCLA. Great, let's roll the dice and see what happens. Here's the difference though. In the national list, your student, should have a 70% chance of getting into that school and a 100% chance of getting to your regionals. What I'm really stating there is that I can't give a kid with a 3.4 the same schools I give a kid with a 3.9. Even if they have the same academic interests, I can't do that because I need these ratios to exist across the board for every one of our kids. We're not playing this list for admissions. I know you're going to get into 5 or 6 schools. We're actually playing this list for money. Because once the regional programs in your list, if you've got to the national ones, the regionals bid on you like crazy. And that's what drives the whole economic engine for this whole thing. How do they know how you've applied to it? They actually know it through the FAFSA and through Common App. And truthfully, I want them to know. I want them to see the competition in the pool. It just makes it stronger in the end anyway. So once you start getting in those schools, you start getting scholarship applications from them right around Martin Luther King Day. That's typically about the threshold when they start showing up. So what you do then is in the beginning of December, and this is where we sit down with you as a family in our practice, and we go through and we design a budget based off the value of the degree and based off of what you saved. And I always like to invite the financial advisor in with that meeting as well. So we have a good open conversation about that. And we create a budget for all 4 years, and you stick to it like glue. You do that beginning of December. Hear back from all the schools, all of that. Right around you getting those scholarship applications, what we'll do then, is you take the total cost of attendance, which is tuition, reward, books, subtract out the scholarship money. That gives you a net cost for that school. Then you take that and you run it against your budget for all 5 or 6. And you'll find somewhere under, somewhere over this net. Then we call them all back and tell them to do better. And you negotiate from basically mid-January through April to get the best deal. And you'll find 2 or 3 of those schools won't do anything for you. 2 or 3 of them will move to the 9s to get you to be there. But that's actually why we want to pay attention to the numbers so much, because if we plot a bunch of outer binds, we already know there's no money to be had there. Different setup for different schools in the financial front. The number we're waiting for, the number that's most important in this process at the end of this in the financials, is a number called yield. Yield is, well, the most significant number for a school. Basically, that's how many freshmen do they want versus how many they get. That number stabilizes mid-March, roughly, for every school. And here's the thing about the yield numbers for universities in this country. The vast majority of schools don't meet their yield. Now, the big name ones do, like the Ohio States, the Penn States, the Carnegies, all those things. And actually, this is exactly why they create deferred lists, because if they haven't met their yield, they just cycle down the deferred list in order to fill gaps. The vast majority of schools don't do that. They don't have the capacity to. So what we end up doing is seeing that, like, a lot of these schools in that mid-March to April timeframe start wheeling and dealing these last few seats a lot like a seat on an airplane or like a hotel room the night before. And that's how you get better deals out of the whole thing. I always say, and this is always something I have to instill in our kids early on, is that we're some of the first to get things done and some of the last to make decisions, because negotiations come down the 11th hour. So while all of your friends are saying they're going here and going there in January, well, they haven't seen $1 yet, and they haven't seen their full financial aid statement yet, which to me is like buying a house and signing off on it without seeing the price tag or the final statement for it. That's lunacy. We want to make sure we get down to the actual brass tacks. We negotiate the price that you want and you feel comfortable with based off of your budget. And there we're set. So now we're down to the last 2 to 3 that we've gotten the better deals from. By that point, we've already done all of this real work. You've already gone through and done the career side. The kid has already figured that part out. We found the schools academically that do it best. Negotiate out the money. Well, first that, you visit the campus, make sure you're comfortable there. Negotiate out the money, send them down the line by May 1, and we're done. And that's it. That's the process here. That way we can wrap up and be done right there. You're launched, you're off and ready to go. A couple of quick pieces by working together. Our class of actual 2019, because of those numbers and because of how we actually understand how those structures work, and we go back and negotiate with the universities, we can't do it for you. We can do it with you because of the FERPA. But you better believe we know exactly how it's going to be. We have a bug in your ear, or we're in the same conversations with you, with the schools. You just have to tell them that we're there. Our families have saved about $100,000 over the span of 4 years compared to the national cost average of college. Or better put, even on the local by year level, it's about $25,000, $24,000 per year that we're saving our families, again, versus the national average, which is pretty cool. So we're really showing that it's a major difference there. To kind of wrap this up, our top tips. This is by far and away the most important thing here too. Remember, you're the consumer here. You're buying education. Really, you are. And there's more than enough choice to make this work. College will have you feel every single day that, like, my goodness, you should be thankful that you're paying us $40,000 a year to send your kid here. That is absolutely false. There's more than enough choice out there to make this work both on an economic and an academic level. It's just about knowing how to buy it properly, just like you do anything else. It's kind of the concept of saying, when you go to the grocery store, you're not going to spend $30 on a gallon of milk. You're going to spend about $3. Why? Because that's the fair market value for it, and you know how to shop for it. Same principles here. Begin planning early, start in 10th grade. That's where we like to start with our kids. Mid-10th grade year. Anytime thereafter is fine, but that's really when you want to start this whole process. Know that there are layers to the scholarship game and money game to this. Not only is it just about scholarships in general, because a lot of students and a lot of families think it's about outside scholarships. Outside scholarships are the lowest yield part of this. Interior scholarships from the universities is the key here. And when I say scholarships, I really mean gift aid. And what I mean by that, that's money that's controlled and produced by the endowment structures, which is everything we went through. It's all the same thing. 90% of the money you get for college will always come from the universities themselves. So you want to make sure we stick to that. And let career planning be the driver here. Know that that's really the piece that's going to move this thing forward, because then you can define direction with that. And that's, again, why we spend so much time on that here. Everything else is a series of dominoes after that. And know you have options. You have plenty of options financially and academically. Working together, and when we're working with clients, how it works, it's very simple, very easy. It's one-on-one advisory work. We've got a little bit of workshops in there that we do work with our kids just to kind of separate the phases, because you have career development phase, you have the application phase, funding, financial aid, and the award letter. But for the 90+% of the time, you're working one-on-one with an advisor throughout the entirety of this. Our advisors are really built to work with our kids. They're actually typically young adults. And the reason for it is that we find that high school kids respond a lot better to 24 to 27-year-olds than me or anybody in my age group, because I'm a dad of 4 kids, and at that point it just feels like I'm telling them what to do. So we try to patch them up with students, with young adults that really work best. And they're all full-time advisors for us. They're fully trained. They work as a cohort, one-on-one together. And actually they take on at most each advisor takes on about 60 to 65 kids at one given time. So that way they can keep the client load very manageable and make sure that they really find the time to meet with their kids. We like to see about once every week to 2 weeks, especially if it's this time in the junior to senior year. If it's sophomore to junior right now, every about 2 to 3 weeks. We'd like to catch up with you pretty often for about an hour. Right now we're doing that kind of a mix of virtual and in person. It really doesn't matter to us. We've actually been doing virtual work for years. About 25% of our client load was always been outside of the city anyway. So when COVID happened, we switched to a full virtual model just for the time being. Didn't change a thing. Actually, we found we got more productivity out of our kids because there was nothing to contend with. There's no school and there's no extracurricular activities. We're getting more done now than we have in years. It's been great. So how we like to do that, and if you're interested in it, easy starting point, we just set you up on a family meeting. Totally free. It's just us sitting down over a cup of coffee. Go over a little bit more in depth with anybody that wasn't on this call. That way we can kind of catch them up. And really seeing where you guys are as a family, though. And if it looks like we can be of help, fantastic. If not, hopefully give us some great advice to go forward with. Email me, and I'll be able to get you set up on that. I typically like to meet with families as often as I can that come through the door first to really be able to get you off on the right foot. That pretty much wraps it up. Any questions that I can answer for anybody while we're on the line here?
Yeah, hey, Aaron.
Hey, Jason.
I have a couple questions for you. Thank you, by the way. That was great stuff.
Oh, perfect.
First question is, in the short answer, I guess, what's the process you go through to help a student? My son is going to be a junior.
Mm-hmm.
What's the process of helping him find a career that fits him?
Oh boy.
Interesting way. I don't know how that works.
No, that was a great question. Guys, some time with me because you'll see it. We actually do that in the very first meeting as we start going through how to really think about this a little differently. And I wouldn't even say it's all that different. It's just kind of getting down to brass tacks. The problem we have when we engage the career development side as a society with our kids is that we think because they're stronger students, they know more about what they want to do, when that's a wholly different thing. So here's a great example. I have two types of kids that walk into our office. I'll have a valedictorian that'll walk in and say, I want to be a neurosurgeon. And let's say I'll have a 3.7 and 3.9 kid that says, you know, I have no idea what I want to do. And the truth is, they're the exact same point. This kid that's saying neurosurgeon is just saying because it sounds smart. They have no concept of the job. They've never actually seen it in action. At least they may have an interest in the brain and biology, but that's honestly the extent of it. At least this kid's being honest about it. So what we have to do is dial them both back and really start engaging their interests and start surrounding their interests with career fields that actually make sense based off of that. So if you have an interest in, as an example, the brain and biology, well, that is neuroscience to some degree, but that's more of a research tends. Or do you want to do something more therapeutic? That can mean possibly even occupational therapy, even kind of delving a little bit into pharmacy or psychiatry or pharmacology and things like that. Those are more practice and hands-on piece. Or do you want to stay more theoretical? Well, maybe we look more at biochemistry with a mixture of neuroscience, because that's kind of giving more of the theory approach. All of these things kind of surround that. So basically, when you come in, we'll sit down and talk about that and start engaging where their interests are and start actually writing those pieces up in order to see what's going on there. I'm going to see if I'm going to stop this. I'm going to see if I can find a quick example to show you of what a proper board should look like. Because in the end, what we want to do is put together a student's board. And I'll give you an example of what that's going to look like in the end. Sorry, I want to definitely show you this. Let's see here. This will be a good one. I actually just did this one literally just yesterday. Let's see here. And forgive the picture because it's a little crude, but it'll do for the time being. Let's see. Share screen. So this is a great example of an evaluation of that assessment we just did yesterday. So where this is a young lady, her name is Olivia, where we go through career fields and we start taking down her interests and we just talk through it and say like, hey, what do you like? What are your interests? What are some of your favorite subjects? What are some things that really drive you? All that kind of good stuff. And you'll see like she really talks extensively just once she gets asked the question about what do you like? And it gives them the opportunity to just open up. And that very first meeting, is just be able to talk about themselves kind of like they've never really able to do before. And say what's important to them, what's valuable, what do you really like about, in this kid's case, she started an archery club. She was really influenced by the camp, summer camp that she'd gone to, and she really likes education based off of that. But it's not straight up education that she's interested in. It's more of a wellness, love of nature, being in the environment version of education. So that's a little different than teaching. Now, a lot of people just say, oh, you need to go into teaching, which we do need to study with her, but it's kind of a little bit more of environment, natural resources, recreation management, and she actually has more of a management component than she thinks, because we need to mix that with a little bit of ops. So you take that in combination with possibly a minor in operations or education, maybe even ecological engineering, and now we at least have a starting point of majors that this kid hadn't thought of before. She came in and said, I want to do environmental science with a minor in music. Well, the real translation for her is something with environment, natural resource, and wildlife management mixed with recreation management with a minor education. That's kind of where she's going to end up. We like to talk through that with the kid to make sure that they know which way they're going. And that's the starting point. That way we can really hit the ground running. We have a list of majors that really begins and ends this thing. So that's the stuff we like to do with our kids, and that's how we really started. And then they start working with their advisor on it.
I have a follow-up question to that. What's the cost? What do you pay for this? What do a parent pay?
So we work off a one-time retainer, and it's right at $44.50, and that's it. We're with you for good, unlimitedly after that. And you can do it up front if you like, but we can do it over payment plans. It's super simple. We set it up on long-term payment plans with no problem. Yeah, that's it. And we're with you for good unlimitedly. We're with you throughout the high school years, and actually we stick with you while the kid's in undergrad, because honestly, those are our measurables. The national measurable we use for college is wrong, which is getting into college. There's nothing hard about getting into college. It's actually pretty easy. It's really about getting out with the right degree for the right school, right time frame, right job, right starting salary. All those things are the things we have to track as time goes on. So we're really with you, especially if your kids are going into the junior year, about the next 6 years.
Okay. So you those savings you showed, I think you said 46 million saved over all the years. So you calculated that through what the cost would have been, right?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for you pointing in the right direction. So that's where you came with that number.
Yep.
Awesome.
And that's represents about a $24,000 per year savings on average per family based off of the national cost. And again, there's really no trick to it. There's no magic pill for it particularly. It's just by doing it right. It's just by knowing all the steps and doing it in the proper procedures. Just like anything.
Yeah, finding an expert that knows how to work it.
That's exactly it. And I always say, like, for families, don't feel like you have to be the expert in this. I mean, Jason, you have 1 or 2 kids? How many?
2.
You have 2
daughter who's 14.
You're going to do this twice in a lifetime. You're going to buy more houses than you will do this. You know,
right.
You don't feel like as a family you have to be an expert in this by any stretch of the imagination. This is literally the thing that you're going to do probably the least amount. So you want to make sure you nail it. And that's where coming and working with a group like ours really can make the difference. And that way you're good. You're in good shape. You don't have to worry about doing it again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No problem. All right. I think that wraps it. Any other questions? If anybody has any questions after watching the webinar, please feel free to shoot them my way. I'm sure my contact information was on the piece there, so you can get on.
Aaron,
mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Oh, sure. Fair enough.
Do people, so my son is going into his sophomore year at Miami. Do you work with families, or do you see opportunity? I know there are scholarships available to students during college that weren't available prior to college. Do you work with families on acquiring any additional funding while they're in school that is not loan-based?
Sure. It is something we can help in. It's a little tougher once you're in school, only because of the fact that you are there. There are opportunities available. Actually, in those cases, to be honest, I always say it's a good time to go talk to your department head as a student. The majority of scholarships, again, that you get for school always comes from the university themselves. Your biggest leverage point is senior year into freshman year. That's your biggest leverage point in order to do that. From an admission standpoint, from all of those. But the one thing that does open up as time goes on is scholarships within your specific department. So a lot of money really stays on the sidelines from the department and giving the student scholarships for their particular major, especially in the freshman year, because they're an unknown commodity. They shouldn't have been coming freshmen change their majors. So they don't know if you're actually in that field yet. As time goes on, sophomore and especially junior and senior year, you're more of a proven commodity. You're going to actually do that major. So that's where if you go back to your actual department head, any of the deans in particular, you should be able to have a really good conversation about what extra scholarship money is available at that point from the department, and or through organizations that are within that field. Predominantly scholarship money at that point is going to come from the area that you're going into. Right. Great example, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, offer a lot of scholarships. They're mostly for juniors and seniors. So why? Because they're engineers really at that point. They know they're actually banking on the fact that they're going to be engineers. And as a great example of this, as the follow-up for the department piece, this actually happened for me too. So I didn't graduate in 4 years. I graduated in 4 years and 2 quarters. OSU was still in quarters at the time. But I remember coming back for the fall into what would have been the start of my 5th year. And, I was young and egg on my face. I drove back to school, and it was literally the week before I was getting ready to settle into my first apartment because I was an RA for years. And I'd gotten a full tuition scholarship from OSU, but it was gone. And I didn't understand why. And so I went to admissions and financial aid and said, what's going on here? And I said, well, your 4 years are up. I mean, even though it's going to take you 5 years, the scholarship is a 4-year commodity. And I learned that the hard way. And so I scrambled to try to figure out, what am I going to do? My scholarship is gone, and I hadn't had the debt structure in place in time because it was a week before school. So I actually went to the dean of engineering, and this is where you kind of want to do some networking now and with them and really get to know them. You don't want to come to them and just say, hey, where's money? You want to come in and know them a little bit for a while, just like you would for anything. I had sat down, her name was Dean McGee, and I sat down in her office and said, hey, I'm in a bind. My scholarship ran out, and I really don't know what to do. What direction should I take? And I'll never forget this. She went out of the room for a minute, and then she went over to another guy's office, and then she came and got me and said, Aaron, follow me. And she took me down to this guy, I believe his name was Dave, and she told him the situation. She said, Aaron, tell him a little bit more. I said, well, my scholarship ran out. And I watched them transfer the money from the Department of Engineering into my account right there on the spot. And I walked out there, my tuition was covered. Just like that. That's the power of knowing somebody within the school structure and knowing those things and those pieces. So that's what I would encourage you to do at that point. Like, those are going to be more powerful and more wielding than anything else.
My final question is, do you think negotiating power is going to change based on COVID having disrupted the financial structure of universities in this latter part of this school year?
Thank you for that question. We've been studying the heck out of COVID and what it's doing to our higher education structures. I will say this, the beginning of it, COVID hasn't made anything particularly happen that we're seeing. And what I mean by that is, all these schools were in the situations they were beforehand. It's just exacerbated it. It's just made it a lot worse, right? So we're seeing schools starting to go out of business. I'm sure we've all heard of Urbana and this and the other. Urbana was actually out of business years ago. They actually went out of business about 4 or 5 years ago. Franklin actually bought Urbana and used it as a satellite campus. Franklin just closed a satellite campus. So these things were already in works, these financial troubles, mostly for the reason that universities haven't adapted to the modern norm of this particular fact. There are less kids going to college today than there were 10 years ago. Actually, it's about in the range of about 10 to 11%. Now, there aren't less kids per capita going to school. That number is still increasing, but the answer to that is we had less kids. That's really what it was. We just had less kids as a generation, and they're still banking on the same numbers that they were using in the early 2000s as far as kid volume. That doesn't exist anymore. There just aren't enough bodies anymore. So these financial woes were really happening across the board. It just was a matter of time that these things showed up. What we are seeing are endowment structures being hit left and right. OSU, I mentioned they were at 5.2. They were right at around a 4.8. Now that doesn't change much for OSU, right? Like they're still fine. They're going to be fine. Different universities, different structures. The smaller schools that really exist in that Otterbein level and below are going to take a bigger brunt and a bigger hit of this, and they won't have the financial aid packages for class 21 that they had for class 20. So we've got ridiculously good money for families this year, especially for that reason, that the endowment structures are just any other investment portfolio, just like anything else. The market from January 2019 to January 2020 was fantastic. We saw gains like crazy. So when we came into this COVID time, scholarship money was already set. We already knew how much money they had in the pool. The problem, well, the good thing for us actually, and I mean this in a strategic way, is that the universities were all scrambling because nobody knew what was going on, because COVID hit right when the commitment time frame was supposed to take off. And so schools were scrambling and people were scrambling and not knowing what was going on. Well, we sat back and kind of held back, knowing that money was still good and fruitful. It just meant that if you're not meeting their yield, you're going to start offering more money. I heard this from plenty of universities and their admissions directors, where they pretty much said, if we have a student that hasn't committed yet, we're going to throw resources at that in order to close that deal. It didn't happen. I have one student that's getting ready to go to the University of Minnesota, where we'd gotten no money at all from them. In comparison, we'd gotten $7,000 out of Toledo, $3,000 out of OSU, and a few other places. Minnesota hadn't given us a dime until the end of March. They came back with a $5,000 scholarship per year. We had a conversation with their admissions department 4 days later, and we got an extra $5,000 per year. So now we went from 0 to 40,000 over the span of basically 5 days just by conversation in most cases. That's how it worked this year. My thought is that we won't see that as readily next year because the endowment structures are going to take massive hits. Now, what does that mean? it means that there's a portion of population, school population, that will be a problem with. There'll be a portion that it's not a problem with. This is what we do every day, though. We track financial numbers. So we know that going in. I know the schools that are going to be financially struggling. We're going to avoid the heck out of them in 2021. It's just the truth of it. Even if they have programs that are academically strong, if they can't afford you, if they can't fund you, there's no point to be there. So we have to make sure that that's going to be the case. So working with us, we've already calculated that in, is basically it.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. I think that's probably it. Are we ready to wrap up? Or
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron.
No problem. Yeah, just want to make sure we sign off properly here. Oh, well, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate the time. I hope it was useful. I hope it was helpful, at least to kind of understand the forest for the trees.
It was.
And we'll get a follow-up email out to everybody with your contact information, Aaron, and they can always contact us, and we'll put you in touch with Aaron as well.
Okay.
Hey, Jocelyn,
Yeah.
will we get a copy of any of this? I was going to share some of this with Kathy, or I know
We
you're
did record the session today, and we can send that out in our follow-up email as well.
okay. All right, thanks, Gerber team as well. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. I love doing these talks. They're super fun because it's hopefully pretty enlightening stuff.